So I'd like to welcome everyone here in the audience and also to the wider audience online to the first of a series of interviews that are going to happen through the Haven's 30th anniversary year in 2013. Our intention is to create an oral history of the Haven, to get some of the stories about behind the story of the Haven from people who played a key role in the Haven's history. So it's absolutely appropriate that we start with Jock McKeen, who together with Bennet Wong founded the Haven back in 1983, 30 years ago. And Jock is going to be interviewed by Dale Partridge. What they will tell you, they'll tell you some information about the Haven that to some of you may be news, to some of you not. It's the story of how the Haven came to be and how the Haven will continue into the future. Our 30th anniversary is only halfway to our 60th anniversary, so we're looking ahead as well as celebrating our past. So, with no further ado, I am going to hand over to Dale Partridge and to Jock McKeen, and I wish you all a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Jock, first of all, congratulations.
On what?
30 years. 30 years. Have you let that sink in?
Sometimes.
Before we go too much farther, I really impose upon you to explain where Bennet is as we speak,
Oh, yeah.
and that we have him here symbolically.
Well, I did encourage him. Ben's been ailing these days, not in a drastic way, but just he's tired today. And so I encouraged him to stay home because he knows the stories,
Yeah.
and that I would be gladly speaking for both of us. And we have done that. We've been in and out of each other's pocket for 40 years. So this 30-year history is actually came after a decade of working together. We actually worked on the principles of Haven before Haven was.
Yes, and we'll go into that
Yeah.
later on.
So that's about Ben. The picture itself, I was reviewing, was celebrating the 25th anniversary. So that's a 5-year-old picture. And was shot, it's called Dancing Hearts. And just somebody caught us and said, do this, pretend you're dancing, and we
Sheer
did.
joy.
Caught it, yeah,
Just
it's
sheer
wonderful.
joy. I'd like to go back to 1983. What were you thinking? And here we are celebrating our 30th anniversary at the Haven, but 30 years ago, what were you expecting to have happen?
Well, we got to go back a few more years before
No,
that.
we aren't going to do that.
We're not, okay?
When you arrived on this property, what were your expectations?
Okay. We had been driving up and down Vancouver Island looking for a resort to buy because we had sold all our worldly possessions and liquidated with the intention of buying a resort on Quadra Island, and the deal fell through. The deal fell through because the bank welched on the deal and wouldn't sell us the foreshore rights. And so we had to go to court, get out of the deal, and suddenly we were cash in hand, but we'd advertised, come to our programs.
You were already doing workshops.
Yeah, and we've been going across Canada, and we had a number of people who wanted to come to our advertised program this fall on the ocean side of British Columbia. We got that from. So Ben and I literally spent our weekends driving up and down Vancouver Island. We went into the resort and said, "Are you for sale?"
Wow.
And we then found a wonderful realtor who said, "I'll put you in my back pocket, and when we're done, you'll have a place." He took us to Gabriel Island, and he said, "You have to think about what this could be." And we found this tumble-down resort in great state of disrepair, a few tumble-down buildings, and this ring of trees, and it was green. And he said, "Think about what this could be." And so what we were thinking about was, well, okay, what we were thinking then is we can have our seminars here this fall in the lodge. And so we did. We had the seminars in the lodge, and we had the idea that we could run a resort in the summer and have seminars in the winter. And it would be a good fit.
So it was expected to be a dual personality at that time.
Yeah. And in effect, the seminar company could rent from the...
Oh, okay.
This is
That's
Ben's
the business side. Yeah, exactly. The hope was that you'd have some place to do your workshop.
That was it.
Fall.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you never really started 30 years ago visualizing the buildings that exist today, or visualizing the contribution that's being made over 30 years.
No. We built one building at a time.
Right.
The principle was, if we made some money, keep it in the system and build something with it. So the lodge was okay, but there was an old barn out there, and we tore that down quickly. One of the fourplexes was in great disrepair with London. So we built the Heron building. We were going to get an ATCO trailer, and then when that didn't pan out, we were going to get a...
We're so grateful that...
we were going to buy a display home at the PNE, and we were going to truck it, barge it across. And what stopped us was we would have to cut a huge swath of trees because we'd have to come in the long bay. So anyway, we realized we've got to build something. And we built, ready to occupy in an unbelievable length of time. We'd advertised in Horizons in September of that year. We arrived here August 1. And we had a skeleton of the building where we had New Horizons in 6 weeks. And somehow the contractor got inspired with our enthusiasm. He said, we'll walk this through. And he walked through all, because it takes months to do that.
You've attracted a lot of support over the years.
Yeah. So what we were thinking of is we'd have a building, we'd fix the lodge up, we'd have a few people, we'd have some seminars, and in the summertime there could be a resort, and that was that.
So you really weren't taking yourselves too seriously back then?
I was, but not for that reason. But we were, I think, genuine. But no, I didn't really agree. We wanted to serve the people that we met in a human way.
I guess the thing that I got when I came to Haven, and I snuck through the back door like a lot of people did, and that I came to support another person who wanted to have the Come Alive. Yeah. And I scoffed and said, well, sure, fine, I'll go. Never, ever expecting what actually happened. And while my friend came out profoundly changed and impressed, I came out just overwhelmed in that first Come Alive.
So you were in the Come Alive since
1990. 1990 is the first time I showed up. And so one of the things that I've figured is this piece of property has some attributes, and one of them is that it's a very safe place. Yeah. Is that your intention?
Yeah, like, okay, you're back to what were we thinking? What Ben saw, Ben's really intuitive, and what Ben saw right away was, this is special. And it was the ring of trees. And it was, the name Haven was his. Ben said, this is protected. And then we discovered later the local lore. Apparently the coast Aboriginal people didn't live on Gabriola. They came here for special ceremonies. And they wouldn't live here because this was like a sacred spot. And this was always known to the Aboriginal people as the green place. Now, you know, you could logically say that it's probably waterways run down or something. Yeah. But you could, in the summer when everything goes dry, it's brown everywhere. You get the Haven's green. Yeah. And it's that.
Fabulous. I was wondering in terms of the have-tos that Haven represented. Like, I'd taken a lot of courses before I showed up at Haven. I was a courseaholic. But Haven's different for another reason in that you stay here. It's a 24/7 experience. Yeah. Is that always the intention, or were you doing them on the road before? Or?
Well, as you know, we were a private practice. And so in our private practice, we would see people for 1 hour a day. And we would talk about human things and teach people about communication, and people would become more open with us. And we began to see the limitation of that. If they're open with us, that meant it's easy to get sort of stuck. It's that therapeutic relationship business. And so when we got asked to invited to do groups at Cowan, we saw, wow, this is terrific. People can talk to each other, and we can get out of the way. And so the group process meant that we could get past the stuckness of the who's teaching whom or how the therapeutic endeavor works. And people could then become learning labs on their own in relationship. And of course, that's what we were trying to do.
Let's go back to that.
Yeah.
You mentioned Cold Mountain, etc. Cold Mountain was what, 19...
It was, I think it was established, it came to BC in 1969.
Okay. And it's often referred to as Essalon.
Of the North, yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, in those days, I think there were 1,000 growth centers around North America. And the sort of key on the west coast, south, was Esalen. And the originators of Cold Mountain had the idea that we could have the same humanistic principles as are going on here, and we'll have one up north. And the consortium of, well, who it was Alan Watts, Lama Govinda, Gary Snyder, a number of other people I'm leaving out here at the moment. But who?
Aldous Huxley was given some credit, apparently.
As the lover of Barry Stevens, who was part of all of that. Yeah.
Barry Stevens didn't make the cut.
It was a matter, a number of people put some money in it. Some people, they put some money in to have a property on Cortez.
Okay.
But the idea was to have like a learning institution.
Okay.
I'll get it. I got it.
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. If for whatever reason we're not getting received properly, the technicians will come by and fix us up properly. The thing that I didn't get, and it seems important somehow, the Second World War finished, the world had been changed forever. The U.S. was now the strongest, most powerful, richest country in the world. People came back from the war and they needed houses and dishwashers and whatever else, so factories were built, and there was that great period right through the 50s where virtually everybody seemed happy. Everybody was enrolled, everybody was kind of doing what was expected of them as they built the new society, both in the U.S. as well as Canada. And then a strange thing happened, and it was the 60s. What happened? I mean, it seemed like people went a little berserk in North America.
Well, what happened for me is I was on that sort of aggressive, let's get to the top of things path, and was in medical school in the 60s. And medical school and medicine, the practice of medicine, was that hierarchical, doctors were the most powerful people, which is a lot of my motivation for going there.
Right.
But in the process, the zeitgeist at the time was, hey, we're all one people. And let's get together, let's learn to care about each other. And so I was changing while I was a medical student. And so this power monger guy was joining in with everybody else. Like we were finding our hearts.
Yeah.
And the idea was, you know, the culture was too stiff and we had to loosen up.
You went to medical school at the University of Western Ontario.
That's it.
And I recall the story about some professor that was exceedingly important to you at that time. Remember his name?
A couple of them. Both of them just died this past year. Ian McQueen,
Yes.
who was a professor of family medicine.
One of the comments that he's attributed with, which I quite like, he kind of sensed who you were.
Before I did.
Yeah, he figured out that, gosh, that's one. That must be a talent there. He also noted that you had great difficulties with the medical model. And even as a student in medicine, you were challenging it and wondering what else it should be. Remember those days?
Oh, I do. And what I didn't know, but he told me when he was in his 80s and came to visit, that he was having trouble with it too. And I didn't know that. That's all the background for my meeting Ben. And I had known about Ben before. I came out west to intern. And had known about Ben because he was Canada famous.
Yeah.
He was being interviewed about youth. He was an adolescent psychiatrist and had been in practice.
Tell me though, you got your medical degree,
Yeah.
University of
1970.
Western
Ontario.
Yeah, Ontario. Then I was surprised you came out west for your
Rotating internship is called. They must do that in practice medicine.
Okay, so you're an indentured slave for a couple of years.
1 year.
1 year.
Yeah.
And then, it's very big on your resume, is that you had a specialty, and it's kind of where, I guess, I could have noted here somewhere, you and George Clooney had the same beginning. In the ER, that was it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, we were before ER was a specialist.
Yes.
We were realizing that there was something important to be happening. For us, it was great because we could work long shifts, 24-hour shifts, and then ski for 4 days.
Oh, great.
So it was like, you know, part of being mid-20s and stuff. It was terrific. But I was doing emergency medicine with a group of young people and seeing a lot of, you know, dealing with trauma. And
That was at Royal Columbia.
Royal Columbia Hospital
Yeah.
and in Burlington.
Amazing. The sequence of events, obviously you were born in Owen Sound, I think.
1946.
1946. Holy mackerel. You got your medical degree very quickly, didn't you? Or very young?
Yeah, I believe 23 or 4.
Yeah. Pretty much an achiever
Hot
of some
shot.
sort. Yeah, exactly. Then you did your internship, and you said you became aware of this fellow Bennet Wong. What was your expectations of him? And at one point, he became important for you to know. Why was that?
Well, I was headed for psychiatry. Backing up, Justin's mother and myself had worked with Justin's mom as a psychiatric nurse.
Okay.
And so we were both rebelling against the system by doing social outreach. And so we worked in street clinics and stuff like that. This is in the drug crisis center days. And so we were doing the unthinkable. We were befriending our clients. And so we were hanging around in the street with the kids who were in trouble and talking with them. And finding that there was a lot of human value going on in these interactions and what was healing and what was interaction. They were getting very mixed up when we were studying it.
So you were already kind of establishing the foundation of what ultimately became your life's work.
Yes, I was, and I didn't know it.
Yeah.
I thought I was good at adolescent psychiatry, so I would go to Bennet Wong, who was the most famous adolescent psychiatrist, and I would learn at his feet. And, you know.
Let me go back and we'll just fill in some information about Bennet Wong, because unfortunately he couldn't be here this afternoon, but he was born on July 16, 1930.
Yeah.
And he was born in a strange place called Strasbourg, Saskatchewan. How many people would live there?
I think 1,500.
1,500. 8 of 10 children. So,
Give or take, because there were people coming and going and several kids died, so it's hard to say. It depends how you calculate it.
but enough to say that in Strasbourg they were virtually Chinatown.
They were the only Chinese family.
That was a joke.
Yeah.
That's true. At the age of 14, Bennet Wong had a profound belief that he would become a psychiatrist, which is pretty amazing for a 14-year-old. And that was still 2 years, I think, before you were born. 16 years between you. So he, at that tender age, was confident he'd become a psychiatrist. By the age of 25, he got his medical degree, and that was at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And then he got his psychiatric degree, or whatever the proper nomenclature would be there, at Winfield State. Is that
well, you see, he went to Menninger's.
okay.
And so psychiatry boiled down to psychiatry medical proper and psychiatry psychoanalysis. And Menninger was the school of psychoanalysis. And they purposely had put their training school in the middle of nowhere so that their residents would do nothing else but practice psychiatry.
Yeah.
So Ben went to Menninger's, which is in Kansas. And in the process of that, you get to have a clinical experience. Well, his clinical experience for 2 years, he was appointed the clinical director of a treatment center for what was then known as the Institute for the Mentally Retarded. And he arrived and had, I think, 2,000 people who were really being treated like animals.
I can recall listening and watching Ben tell the story about how they would care for the patients, particularly for purposes of hygiene. They literally turned a hose on
They
them.
hosed people down and just threw trays at them. And they were treated like animals. And
that was like 1956.
Yep. And there were hardly any psychiatric drugs in it. There was one or two antipsychotics is all. Ben walked in, did his first grand rounds, and said, this is going to change right now.
Wow.
And he started making programs. He said, these are human beings, and you're going to treat them like human beings, and furthermore, you're going to be human beings doing it. The staff got just filled with inspiration. And this is one of the things I admire about Ben. Like, he gets an idea in his head that's human. He was relentless. And his staff all just got on side with him, and they started enjoying going to work. First thing was get everybody clothed, and then he started teaching people to eat. And it's such a beautiful story.
War cry of his life would be respect.
Yeah.
He's always had that genuine respect for human beings, and that would be another attribute that's so strongly established here at the Haven.
Well, insofar as Haven has been, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And that story you just related, he didn't go in there with a roadmap. He didn't go in there with a manual. He hadn't graduated in the training of the kind of thing he was going to change this institution.
Oh no, he described himself as a skinny Chinese kid. He's the only Chinese person or thing. But it offended him so profoundly that there was no way other than that.
And he honored that sense of outrage in himself.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. Now, it's interesting, he then came back to the west coast of Canada
61.
in 61, and that's when he started into private practice, and he was a specialist in youth and adolescents.
That's right.
Yeah. And so you had heard about him.
I eventually, see, in 61, I was still in high school.
Okay.
But when I was in medical school, I started getting interested in psychiatry.
Right.
I started getting into emotional medicine. And then getting interested in the interests of youth with all of this work with the drug culture that I was doing. It was just a natural fit that I would want to meet him. But I didn't know what he came equipped with. I just knew he was the... Actually, the kids in those days were going back and forth, hitchhiking back and forth across Canada. It was the kids who introduced him. They just said, you're going to Vancouver, you have to meet Bennet Wong.
Wow. There's a reputation for it. Isn't that amazing? The thing I don't get is there's 16 years between you.
Yeah, a little more.
Is it?
Almost 17.
Just about 17 years. And somehow, somewhere, at some time, you and he began a relationship.
Yeah.
Give me the background of that.
Well, the first part was spooky, because I went in his office and I was thinking it would be like, you know, here's a professor and I don't know where I'm going and stuff like that. I found this warm guy dressed in very casual clothes laughing away with his patients. And I watched hour after hour these depressed kids come in and they'd go in and all gloomy. And at the end of the hour, they were laughing.
Wow.
And I've often said to people, you know, here's a guy who has a success rate greater than a surgeon. He's doing something, and I don't know what it is. Well, what it was is that he was so naturally making contact. And that I find inspiring about him. He doesn't do it for effect. He doesn't do it because he gets something out of it. He loves people, respects people, and in that contact, he's got a green thumb, but he's got a green psychological thumb.
Good term. In the early years, so you were going to simply meet him to get something done. Is that correct? You needed some qualifications.
Yeah, I actually thought I could sidle up to him and sort of enter his world and swallow him. And then, you know, step on my way up. It was a career move.
His sleeves.
Well, you know, I mean, I say that story, and I say it jokingly, but I do believe there are two levels. I think that's the surface level that I was operating on, which is the power level. But I think in another dimension of me, that green thumb touched me too.
He talks about a story, and you'll have to validate this or correct it, I don't know when. He relates a story where he and some friends decided to go over to see you. And it was very early in the two of you knowing each other. And here's why I'm trying to remember it. scene, which will always live in my mind, is that you were in your living room, stark naked,
practicing yoga,
doing yoga, and so
getting enlightened.
they walked in and started walking around you as if you were for sale. Is that pretty much the scene?
Well, that's the way he tells it, which is that they came and tried to have a party, but it was sort of boring because I wasn't talking to anybody, wasn't offering to serve food. And so he thought it was really unhosting of me. And so he thought he better put a stop to this. So what he did, and I was in some position, I guess, where I was all bent over. And the story he tells was that he licked me from the base of my spine to the top of my head, and I exploded, but it wasn't with, lightning.
Finally had to give in.
Fury. Well, I haven't done yoga since.
No interest in it either. In terms of that period, you said you were seeking enlightenment. As all this was happening in North America during the 60s, early part of the 70s, and we did whatever we did in that period, that same sort of thing was happening all over the world. I think particularly in India, correct? So enlightenment and raising your consciousness, is that?
Well, of course, the Beatles went to the Rajneesh, or not the Rajneesh, but Maharishi. And,
right.
Yeah, it was the times.
And that was part and parcel of a real we don't like it statement to general society. Okay, so you had joined that cult, as it were.
In a way.
Yeah.
But part of that cult, if you followed along, is the establishment is all bad and all wrong, and all traditional learning is wrong, and it's fake to get a degree, and we had degrees.
Yes.
And it was fake to think, you had to just feel, and yet we found we were thinking a lot. So we kind of found we were more like one foot in the canoe, one foot on the dock.
But I think of you personally at that time, just at the beginning of the relationship, before you actually had thrown in together, that was your path. You were seeking enlightenment. You were seeking consciousness.
Yeah, but I wanted to be a rich doctor too.
Yes. You weren't a dummy.
I wasn't.
No. Okay. So, in terms of where the two of you really got hooked up together, what's the background of that? I mean, something happened between you being called Tony Orlando, naked as you were, and then you two becoming such powerful teaching partners.
Well, Ben said to me, we're going to work together.
He had a sense, right?
Yeah, and I was actually kind of interested because that meant, okay, he likes me and thinks I'm smart and stuff, but another was like spooky because what does he want? You know, does he want to abuse me in some kind of way? But he just named that. And apparently he'd been looking for most of his life and ready to never find somebody that he thought would be compatible with working out something neat for people.
So it was for other people, it wasn't for himself.
Right.
Wow.
That's so characteristic of him.
I understand. Now, prior to this, were you married at the time?
Yeah, we both were.
Okay, and he was married as well.
Married as well.
He had two sons, Kevin and Randy, and then you had Justin, to fill in that question mark. So you were all living in the lower mainland of British Columbia, Vancouver rather, and you were working in the same building or across from each other? Or?
Well, I was emergency doctoring and sort of sitting in his sessions to learn on the weekends. But then I went to England and studied acupuncture.
Was that because of Ben? Or
well, let's see. I wanted to go and study psychiatry, but it's a long, involved story that's longer than an hour. But I didn't go into psychiatry. Instead, I went into Chinese medicine and went to England and studied that. And then I came back and we set up practices sort of together. Like he was in this office seeing adolescents with learning disabilities and behavioral problems and stuff. And I was seeing elderly people who had chronic pain. But we had the same waiting room. And we found out that people were coming to the waiting room early because something was happening in the waiting room.
Just to see the other people.
Yeah. Wow. And so Ben is prophetic so many times. He said, we should make use of that. Something's happening. So he could spot it. He said, we should rather than have people come for 1 hour a day and they learn and then just go home and forget it, we should have people come for a day. We should get a bus, and we should bus them out to a farm in Langley. And we'll get a farm, and people can hang around the farm, and they can, play volleyball or something, and incidentally, they'll see us. And so we had the idea that we'd have a big waiting room in Langley for a day, bust in and out. Anyway, that mutated into what's here.
There was the vision, right? That was the very beginning of the vision.
It was.
That ultimately became Haven. Now, later, you kind of threw in together as teachers, and we're both involved with Cold Mountain, which is up at Cortez, which is also on the west coast of Canada. And it was there that the two of you, again, found yourself at odds with the system.
Yeah.
Is that a fair way to state it?
It is. We've run into that numbers of times. We just as an aside, we were taught at a holistic health conference one time. And all the counterculture holistic health practitioners were mad at us because we were doctors. And all the doctors were mad at us because we were talking about complementary medicine, but we got no friends, so we better stick together. But anyways, at Cold Mountain, it very quickly became very steeped in Zen. And Zen Buddhism about the idea of living in the moment. And so that living in the moment, and we were also, Ben and I had been studying Reiki breathing. So it was also with the idea of waking up the body. So we were into that, into Zen. Ben had befriended Alan Watts and Paul Reps. And so that was all part of the time. But those guys, Alan and Reps, really thought Ben was aces.
You're mentioning names, which when you go online or through Wikipedia, they're all kind of the names of the human potential movement.
They are, and these guys particularly were interested in Zen. And Zen is sort of an Asian version of existentialism, which is, if you stop fooling yourself, there's something to face, but if you face yourself, you can get strong. And if you get strong, you can do stuff you never dreamt of. So that's that Zen existential stark piece really suited Ben and me both.
The thing that struck me one night, I remember asking Ben, did you ever see yourself as part of the human potential movement? And I might as well hit him with a poker. He was just disgusted with the question and said, of course. And he saw it as plain as day that everything that you'd be doing was about human potential. I had some experiences with the other kind of human potential prior to coming to Haven. And it seems to me there is a natural split, and you guys ran into it in terms of the old guard at Cold Mountain and your new kind of thing.
Yeah, so to be fair, it boils down to, philosophically, in the zeitgeist at the time in those days, there were a lot of groups, one sort of groups that wound up growing into Est and Lifespring, and that sort of thing.
Counter groups, all that.
Yeah, and the assumption is that I can look at you, and I can know what's going on for you, and I can see you tricking yourself, and I can call your attention to it and help you. But I can know for you what's so for you. Now, Ben always found that repulsive. And Ben's idea was, one can never know. He was more of the Bertrand Russell school. Is this table really here? I don't know. All I know is that I can hear the sound, and I interpret it as a table. So Ben, in his psychotherapy, in his medical career, and his experience with life, would take it that it was his opinion, his feeling. And so as we constructed the communication model, really it was his idea. It's not a prophecy.
Okay.
And then it was that one cannot know for somebody else for sure. You need to check it out. And so the difference then became, really came down to a righteousness or a humility, as we saw.
And the diversity or the two polarities there would be power and empathy.
Yeah, and then as we've written about, mostly the power and strength.
Okay.
So power being taking control of somebody else and knowing what's real out there. Well, in the Zen existential way, there is no out there. There's only...
When I came to Haven, the thing that was so striking for me, when I'd gone through other courses, there was kind of a template to invite me to become that super being.
in another program.
Yeah, there was a cookie cutter.
The 12 steps to whatever it is, or 6 steps to this.
Exactly.
And we guarantee you'll get this.
But it was all about achieving something, and in achieving that, then opening a door and being able to access things.
So the antithesis for that is our ideal self model.
Okay.
And the ideal self model basically says, okay, if you go on the achievement path, you're going to try and make something which is ultimately a fabrication, and you can't depend on it, it's not real. You made it up. And so instead, trust the sensuality of your guts. And it won't be true, but it won't be false. It's just right now.
But I think that's the key difference that I ran into here. Whereas I was trying to achieve and strive, you come to Haven, you're invited to be.
Yeah.
Just be.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be anything or anyone else. And you created that environment, you created that culture where that could happen.
Yeah, and of course, you know, we don't get any credit for that. That was the sign of the times. Mm-hmm. However, what I think we did was made a school of it. Mm-hmm. Because people wanted, Ben in his day, you know, was almost like a magician. Like, he scarcely would say a couple little words, or he'd tell a little story, or he'd just touch somebody, pow! And I know there are probably people in the room who've had that experience. Mm-hmm. And it looks like magic. And yet, in, I think, his way of thinking, it's just like, okay, just be here, and then stuff happens. Mm-hmm. But people wanted to learn what we did. Now, first of all, I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn every single thing he knew. And so I was a humble person. That was...
But bridge in the time where you guys are both married, you both had your respective families, you had your practices, and then none of that was true anymore.
Yeah.
At some point, the two of you became individuals, and something started between the two of you, correct?
And it started in our practices. As two earnest physicians, we thought we could do better with our patients if we could take down the barriers and help them take down the barriers in communication. So we thought we'd best practice with ourselves. So we go to the office and we meet in the morning and we talk about what the defenses were. Mm-hmm. And you know, there are some obvious ones, like two men getting close. There's so many defenses that I had against that, so much frightened. But as we would talk these things through, and it's really the communication model.
But I get the impression from listening and actually looking at you emote here, this was very exciting.
Oh, man, life. Yeah.
And what was it like for Bennet?
I think really rich.
That's what I get too, and I think of the description of him in Strasbourg, Saskatchewan, and what's your phrase about this lonely...
This lonely, skinny boy.
Yeah, and his constant search to find someone who, when he spoke to them and revealed to them, they would reciprocate, and that never would happen. Mm-hmm. And so you were perhaps the first, but certainly among the very first people in his life that voluntarily came forward. You revealed yourself.
In slow, wrenching steps.
Awkwardly. Not enthusiastic.
Well, 30 or 40 years. Yeah. But what I wanted to touch, which I think you're interested in, is that the formation of the school, was that there's one thing just to be, and you know, just relax and go to the sauna and all that stuff, but that's not bad. It's like to be really loving to somebody is there's a precision about it, which means that you don't talk too long in the group, that you have the lights up when the person needs it. And so people would come in intern training and found it really stringent and frightening. And Ben wouldn't be mean, but he'd have very definite ideas about, hey, like, who's important here? Right. Who's the main person? And it's always, I tried to say that the other day when someone got her diploma, is that somebody satisfactory gets their diploma when they learn to make that shift to other focus without complaint.
Right.
And of course Ben has that other focus without complaint. And so
I think you were born with it.
Lord.
It seems so natural to him. It's just amazing.
I think he's from another planet.
Ah.
No, I really never have. Look at the model here. I really haven't met another person quite like him. You know, and
we need to skip
right.
some questions and some time here.
Right.
The key thing is, I learned from my wife the other day that people who have never been to Haven before will walk around the property and just love the environment. And in the lodge, they'll come across this picture.
Yeah.
And she was stunned by the number of people that say, "Who's that?"
Yeah.
Who's that? You and Ben Wong, the founders of this precious piece of property.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that this all happened because of the relationship that you forged, the two of you. And I want to get to that place where you literally threw in together. Where was the first time that you lived together?
1975. Well, we would live together for periods of time when we would do workshops, so there'd be week-long periods and that stuff. But actually, we bought a house in Cortez and developed the property and cut down trees and all that stuff.
So at this point in time, you're extending yourselves, you're trying to explain what the heck you're all about to your respective families. You were going now on your own, correct? You were free agents, as it were.
Yeah.
And you became partners, correct?
Yeah.
You shared a story the other day that I just want us to hear again about Ben's father. And I think it was for your birthday.
No, it's for Christmas.
Christmas.
My family was very formal and very exclusive, and if you're outside of the family, it's really hard to get in. Ben's father was, well, he had a quality like Ben did. He's just very inclusive. And so there were always more people in the house than there were family members, because anybody could bring anybody home. So anyway, here we were, a couple of guys in relationship, and this was the days before that was really acceptable. But I started getting Christmas cards, and they were addressed to Jock Wong. And so I knew that his dad was accepting.
That's amazing.
But there was another piece in it. It was a little Christmas card opened with this $5 bill. And every year I would get
every member of the family.
Every member of the family get $5. And so I got a card to Jock Wong and $5. And I always knew that man loved me.
I was going to say, what an act of love.
Yeah.
Now, in the biography that I've referenced relative to you, as you're saying, the two of you got together, but it wasn't an easy or a natural fit, particularly with your energies coming into it. You started to live together, and there's a scene described by Fuster when the two of you were walking down the street and decided to hold hands, and you objected. You said, "Oh, geez, I don't know about this faggy thing."
Yeah.
So that label, you know,
which was like the worst thing to call when I was growing up.
Oh, absolutely, particularly then. And so the shorthand is people have often assumed the two of you are gay.
Yeah.
Yeah. When that's a real insult to gay people, really.
Well, you know, it's like it's so much more complicated than all of that. And sort of try to do justice to it. We once talked at we were invited to talk to the first conference in Chicago on gay and lesbian issues. And we accepted, and that was fine. And then we got off the phone and realized, I wonder if they know what they're getting. Because we didn't define ourselves that way. We knew we were two men who loved each other. We knew we were two men who were willing to work on getting close. But sex seemed to be something else altogether. And we weren't drawn to each other in that way. So what are we? So I phoned them back and said, like, we're glad to give the talk, but do you know what you're getting? And they said, well, thanks, we'll disinvite you. So we got disinvited by them.
Wow.
We got a group of
they wanted the real thing.
there were some political gays in San Francisco one time who got really mad at us at conference because we wouldn't stand up and say we were. And I said, well, okay, I am, but I don't know what that means. Somebody in a group one time said, I got it. I first thought you were homosexual. And then I kept watching and I realized, no, you guys are really friendly and stuff, but it's not like that. You're homosexual. And then I said, I kept watching, and I said, your home is spiritual.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
it's a good one. And so when we were interviewing the local TV, and she asked us the gay question, and then she said their answer was it's irrelevant. I think it is, basically.
Yeah.
But
it has become such thanks to all the things that have happened for that community, and they're great.
I mean, what is relevant is that we're two people who love each other. And we've studied how loving works and what kills it. And we've tried to teach it, and we've tried to have a school where people could learn it and teach other people.
Well, and in one of the many books you've written together, The Relationship Garden, you detail that. You detail it in really helpful, specific ways that help people. I love this book. I'm just going to throw it aside. The book that just overwhelmed me, and I thought, boy, talk about a lot to take on. The Manual of Life. Was that a deliberate choice?
It's a Wong.
I mean, really?
No, I
passed on
no,
the
but
Bible.
I'm younger than he is, and
Yes.
so I would be sitting at home reading Freud because I hadn't done my homework, and he was helping me, and he would read the Sears catalog because he was learning about how to live in the country and pumps and stuff like that. And so I think he was probably interested in the manual for our GMC truck or something. So a manual, a really well-written manual shows how to get the gears to work. So this is like that.
And that's what it was for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine lots of people had the same kind of background upbringing that I had, and that meant that I arrived here just ignorant as hell. I was a human being, but I didn't have any owner's manual, didn't have a clue. My family didn't have a clue. And suddenly this book went into all of it. And it's a miraculous achievement. I gather you're in the process of rewriting this.
Well, yeah, because actually it's not very well written. It's chunky. And
I'm almost afraid that you're going to change it.
yeah, well, it really was the notes that we used when we were teaching Come Alive and the models and putting them together is repetitious. And sometimes it's overly medical because we were thinking, and because we wrote those things 30, 40 years ago. So now when we're re-editing with Toby, what we've actually done, and this is that Toby and Rachel and Ben and I have been sort of working away at this, we pulled the whole thing apart and we're making the Relationship Garden and a Manual for Life a companion piece.
So you're them together.
And they won't have repetition, and we're trying to make the language consistent.
Yeah.
But the idea is that each one of us can learn to be more with each other, to share, and become more empathetic.
And there'll be new material there as well, probably.
Well, the new material is the clarity, I think, and the dynamic empathy.
Yeah. Well, as one of the ignoramuses that values this book, I'm so glad you're not changing it or suggesting for a second that it's irrelevant. Because this book was life-giving to me.
It's always sort of puzzled me, but I'm happy.
Yeah.
But we have a friend who runs a B&B in Montreal, and he took the Gideon Bibles out of the place and he put these in.
It was so important to me that I bought copies and sent them to my sons.
Yeah.
And thought, this is almost required reading.
Yeah.
I'm not around. I don't think anybody else is going to tell you this stuff. Read what you're about as a human being here.
Yeah.
Because it's just all there. We can't go into all the thing. One of the great things that I ran into when I came to Haven was a tour de force that you and Ben are as teachers. And yet throughout the literature you're referred to as medical doctors.
Yeah.
Then you have your specialties, you have your acupuncture, he has his psychiatry, you have your Chinese medicine, he has his psychiatry. He is steeped in the Western traditions, you ended up getting steeped in the Eastern traditions. Yeah. And all through it, the overwhelming sense I had was that it was being not just told to me, it was being revealed to me energetically. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so.
Yeah. That you're called teachers, doctors, you're called healers, you're called scientists by some. What do you think you are? What's the label that you feel best about?
A couple of guys.
A couple of guys.
I think a couple of guys who value kindness it's important enough so that if somebody opposes that, it's worth standing up for. And that, you know, we have our personalities and stuff, but what's important is that remarkable things can occur if we can find the way to set up the guidelines and the parameters.
Which is the hard work of relationship.
Well, yeah, but I'm thinking about Haven now. And like, we wanted a safe place. And so, okay, we got a property that was safe. The Aboriginal people saw that. But then it was going to be safe because we were going to have lunch at noon. And there's some certain safety knowing that you don't have to wait till 12:15. And they say noon, it's on at noon. And, you know, it's, you know, we were like fanatic about that. But not because we're jerks. Because, like, if you can provide a safety on the basic things, then you can have the safety of being in a room where people are going to speak honestly. And what we tried is what Ben called the healing algorithm. And so, you know, you've asked what we are. And you see, what I slipped to is the Oriental idea that what we are is we. That we've had the privilege of being the teachers or the initiators of something that's way bigger than us.
I've several times been privileged to, at the end of a course, watching your partner, and tears would be coming down his face because we were all asking him questions as if he was a guru, and as if he was a godlike figure. And Ben, what do you think about this? And he seemed to be so sad. Maybe you could explain why he was so sad in those instances.
Well, in those instances, when people want to glorify him, they miss the point.
Exactly.
They devalue themselves, and in elevating him, they devalue him, and everything's lost.
Yeah.
So it's a terrible loss of stepping on a growing friend.
Mm-hmm. Some of the expressions of that, I call them Benisms, but I can recall, and I was among them, very flippantly say, "Geez, I love you, Ben."
Yeah.
And apparently a lot of us used to say that, and his favorite response would be,
how wonderful for you.
And that was just such a slap at the time, and then a door opener, and then I got it. You get that as well, but there's an earnest act of honoring of that special thing that he has as a human being.
Yeah, but he just would rather that everybody else would get on with their business and then he could relax. Instead of, you know, if they would do it, he wouldn't have to do a bloody thing. And so he's been very happy for me to do more and more. And to him, the prophecy was, Ben said, we have to get out of here. If this place becomes focused on us, then it'll fail. So years ago, we took our names off the Come-Alives. And we were leading them, but we wouldn't, this is when we were dictators. We would insist on not getting names in the Come-Alive, so people come for the Come-Alive program, not for the leader.
And let's just follow up with that, because that's why the foundation can exist today.
Yeah.
That's why you guys can go and be guides,
well,
wherever you want to do.
Ben designed that. That was his idea. It sort of knocked my socks off when he said it, because we were thinking about retirement. Okay, we'll sell the joiner. And he said, no, let's make a non-profit, and we'll turn our shares into the non-profit. And we found a way to do it. And it was like a prophecy. How to take something that's in this form, which is really limited and will die. Anything that's power-based or anything that's based on a couple solo individuals will die. And he saw the regeneration quality.
Again, the Come Alive, which is the first of many programs, but the Come Alive essentially has not changed, right?
Essentially.
Yeah. So essentially now it's getting expressed by new people, younger people, by people who come from other life experience.
Who don't even know who we are.
Yeah.
That's great.
It is. It's amazing. And that's why I think people will keep coming and coming for decades to come.
I think so. Like, there's a marketing problem. Because, you know, I think Haven is really important. I think it's important that there be places in the world like this. And yet I don't see it out there. And you can't clone, people want to clone this, but you can't.
Right.
Like, it takes, This is the working of human hearts. And human hearts then grow understanding about how to be really decent to each other. And it's not a simple practice. It's a earnest practice.
As you flail your hands around and as you get excited, one of the great things that I think is an attribute to you is your willingness to reveal yourself and to express yourself. And the environment that's created at Haven is an invitation to any human being that wants to get in touch with that part of themselves. Would you mind reading this poem? Because I think it says a lot about you, about Haven, about Come Alives, about the continuation of this work.
No setup, no...
Just go.
Okay. Time. The past is a treacherous whore, entrapping us in the pain of regrets and lost desire. The future is a romantic boy lost in a dreamy landscape of vague imaginings. This present is the living glory of senses, feelings, and affections, alive in wonder and grace. We must find brave new words, sturdy language to break free from the shackles of mind-bound conventions and habitual vision. To express ourselves without romanticism, without sentimentalism, without cynicism, without hope, and especially without regret. Like that.
Yeah.
You wrote that. Yeah.
You wrote it. And so, not only did you write it, you present it so well, and any of us that have had the privilege of coming through the Come Alive or any of the phase courses have seen that modeling of how you will express yourself, come forward, and express it in such ways that it just becomes more than the words. It becomes more than the expected outcome. I was going to take you so many other places, but you're too much fun, and there's far, far too much excitement. I guess the key that I want to really emphasize, and I'll do it again, it's the same way that we opened. I hope you let it in. Congratulations. Put your arms around Bennet. Privately say, wow, I think we did it. And I think there's living proof in this room all over the world. And I hope you let that in. Congratulations.
Thank you, my friend.
Director of the Haven. She has been since it became another iteration of itself. She heads up the new owners group and represents the foundation, and she is the one who makes sure, like a good manager has to, that the Haven runs with excellence. So, Rachel, Dave.
Thank you. So I'd like to say thank you to all of you who've been in the audience and those of you in the online audience and the wider world. As Dale says, the audience for this is all over the world. I'd also like to say thank you to Dale for being such a wonderful interviewer, and to Jock for being willing to share your stories here and to bring Ben with you into the room here, but also for creating what you have done. Because of the choices that you and Ben made, the Haven has been able to continue beyond the point where you wanted to be actively involved. And that is highly unusual in the centres that I've come across, where the founders of something as special as the Haven have had the foresight, and I know it wasn't always easy, to know when to let go and to let the next iteration come into being. So I want to say thank you for that. And if anyone here is watching or in the audience for whom this is the first time you've found out about the Haven, we invite you to find out more through our website, www.haven.ca, or by giving us a call to find out about the programs that we offer here. because as I said, we are celebrating our 30th anniversary, and our intention is to carry on as long as we can. So our 30th is just yet another step. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Jock. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.